how, in what context did you create this movie, and how this, yeah, kind of.
Okay, I'll certainly try to answer. Well, first of all, this was my student film at UCLA. It was a product of wanting to share film experience with little kids in the community, because you know, if you can turn on a hi-fi, you can certainly turn on a recorder and do other work in film. And so when Hollywood would come and make films in a neighborhood, they would, you know, really be rude about how they would treat people in the neighborhood. And so when, you know, they would come in the neighborhood and just be distant and keep it very private, you know, as though that you know, they were making physics or something like a bomb or something where it's top secret. And so I remember going at a park in my neighborhood, and I had been working in film and student films at UCLA, and so there was a Hollywood production going on, and so I went up to one of the crew members, and just out of curiosity asked him, like, what are you doing? What film is it? And his attitude was like, don't bother me, you wouldn't know what I'm doing, you know, it's too much for you, you know. And so I was very disturbed about that. And the other thing that was important about how these films came about, the LA Rebellion, was it was a response to the kind of films Hollywood was making about people of color in the community. And if you know anything about the history of filmmaking, like Birth of a Nation was one of the worst and most atrocious films that were made that totally distorted the history of people of color. You know, that when they did Birth of a Nation, which is considered one of the better films made, art films, that it was taught in film school as an exceptional film by E.W. Griffin, excuse me, was it B.W. Griffin?
D.W. Griffin.
Yeah, I mean, it's a name that I wanted to block out of my memory because it was such an awful distortion of history. You know, if you've seen it, it's about a period of Reconstruction of 1870, when after the Civil War, and it showed people of color, particularly black people, who had became people in Congress and started a whole bunch of progressive things. It was one of the most progressive periods in America. Am I speaking too much or fast or anything?
No.
Okay.
Do you understand? No, I think you understand perfectly.
Okay, good, I'm sorry. Because I have a tendency to keep on going and I forget I have translators here, so, and keep telling me to, you know, cut it down. So, okay, so anyway, I'll just stop there and I'll finish it up and ask another question or whatever. Okay, either way. So anyway, but most of us got into film, and we speak of LA Rebellion, as a result of trying to rectify a number of the issues that came about of Hollywood making films about people of color. You know, if you've seen those old pictures, there was debate in the early 20s and on, you know, they had white people in blackface, you know, with the white lips and things like that. And being a person of color, you know, that wasn't our experience. You know, people had normal features and looks about them, you know, and so we were very offended by, over the years, you know, that kind of representation. Because, you know, I remember being at a festival in Hawaii, and the film was screened there. I mean, the film will be showing next week, I think, The Sleep with Anger, and after the screening, there was a question and answer period, excuse me, and one of the people in the audience stood up and raised her hand and said, after watching the film, I didn't know black people had washing machines, you know, and you're kind of like taken aback because that, you can understand, excuse me, where that came from. Hollywood distorted, never wanted to show people of color as human beings or just ordinary people, you know. And so our attempt at LA Rebellion and making films about our culture and people, we wanted to express from our perspective and our sensibilities who we are, you know, instead of the sort of images that Hollywood kept perpetuating, you know, about we didn't have you know, we were more comic figures than anything, you know, never contributed to the makeup of America when we helped build the country, you know, without getting paid for it, you know, and all that sort of thing. So it was always that kind of a situation where we were confronted with, and what we were doing was trying to, I mean, we, you know, the filmmakers, when they had the opportunity, was trying to rectify those distortions, because that's how people around the world and locally saw us, you know, as these pariahs who didn't do anything but you know, just try to take advantage of people who pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, which were the white populations, you know. But you know, they're the ones who got the advantages and everything, and we always had to you know, to do more with less in a certain sense. And so that's how we got involved with trying to make movies, you know. And what I tried to do with Killer Sheep was make a film that involved young people where they can get the experience of making a film, you know, and carry it on to go on to make other films. And which happened in many ways, because after, in the 70s, which, you know, when we started to do this sort of thing, we introduced filmmaking to a lot of the people in the neighborhood. You heard of Spike. Spike Lee was, at one point, largely responsible for bringing filmmaking to the community. There had been other filmmakers, like Oscar Michaud in the 1915s, who, excuse me, who brought filmmaking, was one of the few black filmmakers that made films. And even though filmmaking began with the black population in 1897, as early as that, but you don't hear about that. And so anyway, so that's how we got started, and the reason why we got started. Okay.
If we speak on the inspiration of Killer of Sheep, I think I read somewhere that one of the, you know, elements of inspiration was you meeting a guy on a bus who, or seeing him regularly, and at one point you asked him what was his occupation, and he told you that he works at the, well, meat works.
Slaughterhouse, yeah.
Yeah. So, is it really true? And because I don't know, that maybe a sort of story that's, you know, passed and is not has no actual, you know, foundation in reality. Yeah, myth or reality. But no. Well, basically what I'm asking, I guess, is how from these elements, and the film has the structure of vignettes basically unfolding with very loose, you could say, story developing. So how does it come together in a sense?
Well, that part of the story is basically true. I was opposed to the kind of films Hollywood was making at the time. You know, like I wanted to look like a documentary, and I had taken, when I was at UCLA, I had taken classes by Basil Wright, who's a famous documentary filmmaker who did Song of Salon. He worked with Robert Flaherty and Grierson and people like that, and Yoris Evans. And when I went to UCLA, I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. I wanted to be a cameraman and a documentary, shoot films. At UCLA, they had, the student had this program. They featured in Royce Hall. It was a big theater, by 3 times this size here, and it screened all the best student films at UCLA at the end of the semester, at the end of the school year. But the kids, young people and men, whatever, were involved in personal dramas and films, and they would make films about, you know, their experiences. But most of them were about, you know, their discovery of sex or whatever it is. And there was a time when Flower Children was a big deal, and they would go to this place called Topanga Canyon and make these films, you know, and they would screen them at the end of the year at Royce Hall screenings. And you know, we go to these screenings, but I could never identify with these films because, you know, I came from a community that was into, you know, politics and trying to solve these problems in the community, you know, and equality and fairness and all that sort of thing. It was a time when the Panthers, Martin Luther King, and a number of other folks, political people, were involved in trying to make a difference. And so that's what my concerns were. They weren't concerned about my discovering my sexuality. I mean, that was a given in a way, you know. So, but in terms of just, you know, dealing with fairness and equality, you know, was something that we had looked around and said, this is what our film should be about. You know, what is the black experience? It involves this, you know, so we set out to tell our stories, you know, and as opposed to things that came along like the black exploitation films that were entertaining, but they didn't really speak to the problems that we were dealing with. You know, it was about these superhero black characters, you know, and that didn't fit anything, you know, in my experience. You know, we're just trying to make a living and trying to keep a lot of the things that were that we experienced, like lynching was. I mean, we didn't sign. I mean, wasn't until a few years ago that these anti-lynching laws came into effect, you know, and before that, until Reconstruction, there was this terrorism in the community, you know, of where people who were being lynched indiscriminately in a certain sense, where the FBI, the police department, no one did anything about it, and this ended up going on maybe like I think a couple of years ago when they finally assigned these anti-lynching laws. But it took all these years for the United States to look at this particular problem and not do anything about it. And even then, it was, you know, a kind of situation where it wasn't certain if those things are going to be passed. I mean, those laws are going to be passed, you know. And now it was going back to before the 1964s and things like that, where we made a lot of progressive movements and fairness and equalizing justice in a way. And so, and to us who were involved in the LA Rebellion, was trying to do our share in making the world a different place. And so that's where that came about.
And how was it to work with and do the shooting with the child, with the young people? How was the relation between the camera and then your relation? How was the direction with them, like being director?
Well, it was interesting because I hadn't worked with professional actors, and I was under this sort of neorealistic approach about that you use non-actors. So we had a lot of you know, problems with really really understanding what neorealism was about, and you know, we thought people like this, what do you call it? Stage struck all of a sudden. Forgive me. You know, Rossellini and all those people like that, directors who were into neorealism, the De Sica, and anyway, so you know, we had the notion that you use non-actors, that they're better actors, until you work with professional actors and you see the difference. I mean, it's where you discover that, no, you work with the best actor you can, you know, and that eliminate a lot of issues, because when you're doing a film, it's all about timing, and once you start production and shooting, you stick to that schedule and be on time. Where non-actors, you have to explain everything unless you do a typecast, you know. And I remember this one actor, in this picture here, that he got ill and he couldn't act anymore. I mean, he couldn't, you know, come on schedule and things like that. And so we already shot some film on him. So when you do some pickup shots, and he was feeling ill, and being a director, I was sort of insensitive. I said, well, can't you make it, on the shoot? And he said, well, I really feel bad. I'm really sorry because he didn't live too long after that. Anyway, shows you how directors can be. Anyway, so he said, well, can a friend of his take his place? And we already shot some film on him. And I'm like, this guy doesn't understand what we're doing, It's not like you're watching a football game and they say, well, bring in this new quarterback, and let him complete these passes and this whatever. And it dawned on me that they grew up looking at movies, but not really understanding what they were about, And I don't think I did either in a certain way. But there was this. There's a scene in the movie, I was explaining to the people on both sides of me here, that this little girl is at the faucet and she's sort of competing with her mother for the attention of her father, and so she's drinking water she's getting a glass of water at the fountain, and so she's doing something I was not too happy with, and I said, go up to the faucet and get a drink of water, and so I got down to her level. I said, you go over to the faucet and you get a glass of water and drink it and look at your father and mother, and then so we didn't do it right. So I said, you go over and get a glass of water and drink it like this, and the next time I tell her. And I was keeping getting lower and lower. So every time she would do it, she would get lower and lower and lower. And so I said, no, you do. And I realized after umpteen time that she was doing exactly what I was telling her, getting lower and lower and lower. And I was trying to tell her to stay up and drink, but I kept demonstrating by doing that. And it dawned on me that she was doing exactly what I was telling her to do, but the wrong thing. And so it just like hit me like someone hit me with a brick, You're doing the wrong thing, okay? So then after I told her what her emotions are and things like that, just like an adult, and she just did it like that, and I said, oh, that's what you're supposed to be telling her, dummy, not physically what she's supposed to be doing. So anyway, so immediately I got a lot of lessons immediately at that point, and then it was duck soup after that, but then what the adults, I found that they're the ones who were lacking in many ways, but the kids knew their lines and everyone else's lines, So, I didn't realize how smart they were. But anyway, so that was my experience with learning with actors, but also the fact that when you tell a person who's not an actor to make the adjustments, it's like, okay, you have to explain it in detail. And every time you take time out to explain things, it's time that you run into, time-wise, it adds to the schedule. And then you end up going overtime and stuff like that, which is another problem. And so and when you do talk to a professional, you tell them some adjustments to make, and they come back like that with a new interpretation, whatever it is, a new sensibility. Something new about it. So, and that's what you want, If you're doing an independent film, which they only give you whatever number of weeks it is, but it's still not enough time, and so you benefit from having experienced people on your shoot. And so that's basically what I learned. And then so I had to sort of learn kind of quickly, because I was using non-actors in the beginning, so with this notion that they're the best, not necessarily, but anyway, it was a learning experience.
There were words by the filmmaker and writer Kathleen Collins about your work in general and about Killer of Sheep that really stuck to me. And she said in one of the interviews she says that basically all you're interested about as a director is subtle moral issues on some level. And she's spoken about this in the middle of the 80s, I guess, so many times and many films passed, so it may not be completely true, but still, why do you feel you're so attuned, so attracted to the subject of, these subtle moral problems that people have to face on a daily basis? Because, the character of Stan in The Killer of Sheep. Basically, the film is about, does he allow himself to go into depression? Does he give up to it, or does he find in some moral responsibility to not do it, to be there for his family, for the people around him?
Well, I think it comes from, I used to watch old Hollywood films when I was growing up. They had these movie theaters, not but TV shows like The $1 Million Movie, whatever it is, and other programs like that. And they usually showed pretty good films that were produced in the early Hollywood films, like the Oxbow incident and things that were very, relevant in many ways, and not just violence for violence sake, and so they always had, they were very serious films. I remember there's this word we used to use to describe mature films, and they were like, what High Noon and Shane and things like that, and those kinds of movies. They were good quality films, and I remember, and we used to call them adult films. And so I remember was looking back and trying to find some of these movies and looking in adult, looking for films on the adult section, and I found that that's not the same films, and it's a different, totally different. And so I was looking for, I said, no, they used to call them adult films. Where is Shane? All this kind of stuff, trying to type on the thing. And I kept coming to these images, which, once you get them on your computer, they're just difficult to get out. And so anyway, I learned that they're not the same. And but I remember going when I was in UCLA. We had this really wonderful teacher that taught acting. Her name was Adelia Salvi, and she would give us these shows to direct, these soap opera shows to direct, and so I could never get into them because I didn't think they were serious enough, boy, I did this one series, and it was so bad, and she read the riot act to me, about how awful this is, and I never forgot that, when they, UCLA was very good about deflating who you are and things like that, and so she really talked about how worse, bad it was. But then I saw how some students took it very seriously and made some very good stories from those superficial soap operas, and I learned a lesson from this. It's more than just about the content, it's how you do it, and so that was a really good experience, that was. And then I started taking it serious. You don't need to have this weighty kind of subject matter or anything, conflicts, but the actors can sell it, if you do it right. And so I had another idea on how to make, these stories work, and also one of the good things about going to UCLA at the time, we had to work on each other's films, and so you did do everything, sound, camera, you name it, both sets and everything. So you got the whole ball of wax, and so that was a good learning experience there, And the other thing is we had to work on each other's films a lot, and so you had a lot of opportunities because each film is different, so you had to look at it differently, each one, and try to make it work. Yep.
And about the meaning and the importance of the music, the use of the music and the movie, how it follows not only the emotional part, but all this emotional struggle, but also the more political support and the political in context.
Aesthetic, yeah.
Yes, and how do you work? How did you work with the music? How this follows in your work and this importance?
Well, I used to play a trumpet, and I thought I was going to be a Louis Armstrong or something, because every kid was playing an instrument or something, and I mean, music and football or track or sports were the outlet. I mean, you know, thinking that that's where, if we're going to be successful, it's going to be in those areas, you know. And so also, because, you know, blues and things like that was played quite often, and even though I really didn't understand it, because I was quite young when I was listening to it, but it gets inside of you without you knowing it. I remember it was a period when I wasn't listening to anything, but you know, it was a period when blues, when rock and roll was taking over, you know, and but I remember I was walking down the street after not paying attention to it for a while, and humming all these blues songs, you know, and not realizing that it was sort of like there subconsciously. And I was thinking, where did I hear this piece from? And then I started researching and found out it was from these old 78 records that my mother used to play all the time. And those 78s, I don't know if you have experienced them, they're like hard clay substance that's made, substance made from this, you know, really delicate material, and it would break easily. And I had a lot of these old records I was trying to save and to put in my films because because it had so much meaning for me, you know. And so what I ended up doing effectively was to preserve these things on these hard discs, and there were some pieces that I remember really liking, so I tried to preserve them in film, and so that's how they came about. And if you listen to them, they do tell a story, you know, and so a lot of the images came from them, you know, and from those old records, and so I tried to use them as much as I could rather, and so that's how they came about. You you listen to the things like Sister Rosetta Thorpe, Mississippi John Hurt, and on, and they sort of stuck with you, because I came of an age where I was hanging out with older guys, and they would all have these old records and things like that, and then the rock and roll was coming in, and so I was like gravitating toward that, and so it was this thing of memory and trying to capture that and put them in my film because they had so much meaning at the time.
That's a weird question though, but Killer of Sheep was released, you know, much later after it was made properly, and but still it got recognized in the beginning of the 90s. It gets more and more recognition now. Does it make it, as with other films, does it make it any easier for you to work now? Does it give you more opportunities?
No, I remember you asked me a question earlier about Killer Sheep, and I failed to answer you. I'll just kind of go over that and tell you what you remember about the streetcar and the guy who worked in the slaughterhouse. Well, one of the things that happened, I was looking for a job that my main character would have that would cause him to be in stress all the time, and it would keep him awake at night and have, you know, issues. And so my car had broken down, and I was taking the bus, and it's a long ride to UCLA from the bus. Anyway, so there was a young man in front of me on the bus, and he was dressed in work clothes, and so one day I got up the nerve to ask him. I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, he worked in the slaughterhouse. And it dawned on me was a very, you know, difficult job, and also one that would cause a lot of stress, particularly if you don't like to kill animals. But anyway, so I thought that would be a good idea for my main character to have, because he was doing this job that was sort of ironic in a way, where he would kill animals to, you know, it was sort of a necessary thing you had to do to work in a slaughterhouse and kill animals for people to live, you know, and so I chose that for him. But I had to go. The only slaughterhouse that was available was north of San Francisco, because the slaughterhouses in East Los Angeles, Vernon, was the name of the neighborhood, was exploited by people who were vegetarians. They would go to slaughterhouse and beg to use their facilities and give the impression that they were just indifferent about slaughtering animals or food or whatever. And then they would turn around and make these anti-meat films, they were like they were for vegetarians, and so they had stopped letting independent filmmakers make films using their facilities. So I had to go all the way up to Santa Rosa, somewhere up north, and there was this private company that this family ran for years and years and years, and I told them what I was going to do, and they said, well, sure, you can use our facilities, but don't stop the assembly line. And so I said, okay, I did it. And they were very wonderful about letting me use their facility, and I became a vegetarian after that for a while. But I mean, it's like, it was really hard because, you watch these animals get slaughtered and killed, and these guys are so used to it that they can just stop the production line, wash their hands, and then eat a sandwich right during this whole process, basically. Stop and then eat it and come back and not feel a thing, and I couldn't do that, It was just, you hadn't experienced death like that on such a scale, and you just felt sorry for these animals until the only way the protest was stop eating meat, and that did have little effect. So anyway, so that's how that came about. And by the way, everything in the film is basically happened or an extension or exaggeration of what was happening in real life. So it's nothing that was sort of created out of nothing. It was like I wanted to do something where it reflected the things I saw when I was coming up and the kind of work that people in my neighborhood were doing. I've always respected people who sort of worked, and had these hard jobs, because on the summer I would work with some friends of mine whose fathers were in things like plaster and brick mason and stuff like that, and construction. And I used to admire these guys, these older men who would have arms as big as, like Popeye or something like that, really huge arms and veins running down the arms. And I was sort of a puny kind of a person in a way, and so I always wanted to be a big person. And I tried to gain weight, I tried to have a malt in the morning, and then one in the afternoon with French fries and stuff like that. And I did it for a while till I started getting sick, and I couldn't lift a malt. I would raise it to my mouth and just start shaking, and so I couldn't do that anymore. And talking about a candidate for diabetes and stuff like that, I was just aiming for that. But anyway, so when you're young, you do all the wrong things, and I was a poster boy for that. But anyway, you learn a lot when you're putting in the film, So anyway, that was got me to where I am, I guess you could say.
I would like you to express if there was many difficulties in the period you made this film to produce a film of this kind, like not you only, but also people that wants to talk about Black's lives and all this stuff.
Yeah, there became a movement when more people got involved in filmmaking at UCLA and SC, I suppose, and other colleges in the East, NYU and places like that. When there became a number of filmmakers who were trying to speak to their issues and their life and the life of their parents and so on, who wanted to tell their stories, as opposed to allowing someone who didn't relate in any ways, aesthetically, historically, whatever it is, to the experience of the diverse group of people who live in the States. It was important that that we tell our stories. I remember, I mean, not just black people. We had a diverse group of indigenous people, Hispanics, Asians, and so forth, trying to get to their stories, and so it was important for us to. In fact, there was a teacher by the name of L.S.A.O. Taylor who had this particular program at UCLA who said, "This is a particular program. We're going to give you the equipment. You come back with films that talk about your community, nothing in Hollywood, but." And be honest and tell your stories. You have a chance to do it now, do it. And so that really helped to guide who we were as filmmakers, you know. And most of the people, you know, students who were waiting to have the opportunity to express who they were, you know, and present themselves and their families and as human beings, you know. You know, not these exaggerated characters that were embarrassing and things like that, but people who they tried to present them as people with dignity, you know, and so forth, and but as human beings, you know, worthy of being, you know, presented without all these distortions, and to make it very difficult for you to be conceived as a normal person, you know. I think I mentioned to it about being in Hawaii. Did I mention that? About how, yeah, I think I did, where the film was shown in Hawaii, and one of the ladies in the audience stood up and said, I didn't know that black people had washing machines. Yeah. And I had there's a situation. I remember trying to get the film you'll see next week, The Sleep with Anger, was a film I started to work on because the original film was based on a true story that happened, you know, to a young lady who witnessed a first-hand murder, and the police found out about it and encouraged her to be an eyewitness. Well, she was an eyewitness, and but the lawyer to the person who murdered this girl, his brother actually, put her name in the paper and her address and everything all about her, and she was killed, and she went to the same dentist I did and went to, and so I was really disturbed about that. So I wanted to tell her story, and so I started writing on the story. I got encouraged to write it from PBS, which is Corporation for Public Broadcast, and they said something like, "Well, here it's, you know, it's free to do whatever you want to," and so they encouraged me to do the film I wanted to do. But when I started writing on it, the whole things started to change. They had a tendency to force you to make changes because they paid you in installments. In order to get paid, you had to do so much writing, you know, on the script, and they would say, you know, you would turn in whatever amount of material you had, and they would like say, well, you know, you would ask, well, when will I get paid, you know, for this, you know, for the little work you've done, and they will say, well, in order to make you change, they won't tell you when, but they'll just say, well, the check is upstairs, you know, okay, and then you turn something in, they still didn't pay you, and you say, you call them, and you say, where, you know, where, am I supposed to get a check? Yeah, but it's upstairs. Okay, you want to say, well, why don't you go up and get it, you know? It's a way to make you change, you know, the stuff that they want you to change, you know? And so this went on for a while, and so I said, no, we can't do it this way. I'm not making any changes. So they told me, well, goodbye, we don't, you know, we can't work with you anymore. So anyway, I said, let me do something else. I started writing To Sleep with Anger. And so we did the same process. They stopped liking what I was writing. And again, this notion, well, where's my check? Well, the check is upstairs. Okay, this went on and on. And so I said, I can't do this. I mean, yeah, I wrote it. It was fiction. And so I thought I wouldn't be connected to it, you know, as such. And I would probably just write something without it affecting me. But I said, but when you start writing something, it becomes a part of you. And I said, no, I can't do that. And so I wanted to take my film back, and they said, you will never be a writer. Oh, no, before that, there's a writer by the name of Horton Foote, or Foots, I keep getting the name. Anyway, so I said, well, Horton Foote just did a scene where he talked about his family life. You know, it's this retelling of an incident that happened, and it's a very long scene. And so I did something somewhat like that. This family talking about, they were from Mississippi, and they're talking about what happened to them in the past. And so I brought up the subject, well, that Horton Foote did it, and they said in a very rude way, but you're not Horton Foote, okay? So then they wrote this letter in addition to saying that I'll never be a writer or anything. Okay, I had to live with that. So anyway, so years later, I was doing a film in Africa, and so I get this call from the States, and they said, we want to give you an award. I said, sure. They said, no, but you have to come back to the States and get it. I said, but can't someone pick it up? No, you have to come and get it, and in person. And I was about to say, no, I can't come, you know, and so I just asked them, I said, well, what is the award? And they said, well, it's the Horton Foote Writing Award. And I said, okay, I'll be right there. And so that's how this sort of thing came about. So anyway, it pays not to be rude on the phone, I tell you. Otherwise, you know, whatever.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for so much. Thank you. Thank you very much.